rainy season is coming. Are you ready or just sort of ready? Prepare a 3-day emergency kit, include tools and supplies, food that doesn't go bad, and 3 gallons of water per person. Have your whole family download emergency apps. Ready SCC and the Red Cross Flood app will deliver emergency alerts straight to your phone. Make sure you register today. Know your flood risk. You don't have to live near a creek to be flooded. Visit Valley Water's website, enter your address to see if you live on or near a floodplain. To get flood insurance, you need it both as an owner or a renter. Most policies do not cover floods. You might need a separate insurance policy. Think about this. If you don't have flood insurance, you risk losing everything. Remember, climate change is making extreme weather more and more likely, but you can prepare your family and be really ready. Flood ready.
All right, good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Paola Reyes-Giles, and I have the honor and the pleasure of being your host tonight. I work in Valley Water's Office of Communications, and I'm here with my colleague, Albert Lee, who is running the Zoom controls. Albert, good evening. How does this all work?
Oh, sorry. I was getting feedback noise on my dual feed here. I am going to spotlight myself as well. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to review the Zoom webinar functions. My name is Albert Lay. I'm with the Office of Communications. So today we are offering our program in multiple languages. We are offering English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. You will see an interpretation button on your toolbar below. Go ahead and select the language of your comfort. Now moving on to the audio settings for Zoom. If you're hearing me, you probably have audio set. But if you're having internet issues like I did earlier, which I had to drive to another house for, feel free to call in and use the webinar ID. You will have an opportunity to ask your questions via the Q&A portal. There's a button below. Also, you can ask your question verbally by clicking the raise hand button. I will call your name out and enable your microphone and just unmute yourself to be asked your question. Please do not use the chat box for questions. Things get buried real fast and we lose track of questions pretty fast as well. All right, that's it for me, Paula. Back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Albert, for that explanation. And we will be answering all the questions at the end of the presentation. So let's run through our agenda for the night. We want to make sure that you get your time's worth from your investment being here today. We're going to have an engineer, one of our senior engineers is going to be with us to explain how you find out if you live in a flood zone. So we'll take you step by step through entering your address and figuring out where you are in that flood zone if you're there and what does that mean. Also, we will be discussing flooding hotspots in your neighborhood. And if you received a postcard invitation to be with us tonight, this is of particular importance to you. We'll also have the privilege of having a flood insurance expert with us tonight to discuss the differences between public and private insurance, what flood insurance covers, and why you might need it both as a homeowner and a renter. And our safety and security officer will drive us through getting flood ready, from preparing a family emergency plan, a go bag, downloading emergency apps, and everything you need to be ready in case of a flood. But let's start by introducing a very special guest. We are honored to have Chair Tony Estremera from the Valley Water Board of Directors with us tonight. Chair Estremera, thank you for being with us, and please deliver your opening remarks.
Thank you, Paula. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting. Valley Water's projects and those of our partners have provided flood protection. Sorry about that. Have provided flood protection for more than 100,000 homes, businesses, and properties. However, parts of the county are susceptible to flooding every year in any storm. Now, the risk of flooding is higher for areas designated as special flood zone hazard areas by the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA. Within those hazard areas, there are community hotspots, which are particularly prone to flooding. If you've joined this virtual meeting because you received a postcard invitation, then you are among the residents living within half a mile of one of those high-risk areas. So let's talk about these risks and some easy steps that you can take well before the water rises to make sure that you, your home, property, or business are safe in the event of a flood. Now, most people say, well, how come now in January, when there's been no water seen around here, you guys are having this virtual meeting about flooding? Well, it's because flooding comes whenever it feels like it. We never know exactly when it'll come, and we need to be prepared. And lastly, we know we have experience that when it's very dry, flooding comes after dry seasons like now. And if it does, we have a real serious problem. And if you live within an area that could be flooded, you have to be ready. That's why we have this session tonight. So now I'll turn it back to Paula, who will introduce our next speaker.
Very
Paula?
wise words. Thank you, Chair Stromera. And you'll have to introduce the children later. It sounds like a happy household. Thank you very much. So let's get started with our program. And it is my pleasure now to introduce our senior engineer, Jack Shu. He is going to go over flood zones, community hotspots, and flood watch tools. Jack, welcome.
Hey, Paula. Good evening, everyone.
And I am now not sharing my screen to allow you to take it over.
Sounds good. See it okay?
Yes, perfect. So, Jack, I know that one of the main questions that many people have, especially if they have joined us tonight, is whether or not they live in a flood zone. How can we find out if we're in a flood zone?
Yeah, good question, Paula. So I want to preface by saying we have an insurance broker who is very familiar with FEMA flood zones and insurance policies. Warren, he'll be speaking later this evening. So a lot of your questions might be answered by him. But I'm going to just right now show you how you can figure out if you live in the FEMA floodplain. So from our Flood Ready webpage at valleywater.org, if you scroll down, there's this drop down here. It says Know Your Flood Risk. And if you expand it, there's a link here to the Map Service Center at FEMA.gov. So if you click on that, you'll get to this area of the website. So there's a dialog box that lets you enter in an address, a city, a zip code, whatever you want. So I went ahead and entered in the address to our offices here at Valley Water. And then you get to this web page right here. It's kind of like a Google Maps web page where you can pan and zoom. And you can here see the pin is dropped at our district headquarters. And this has a lot of information on it. These are different panels for the FEMA map. And what I really want to draw your attention to is this blue area. So this blue is what's considered the special flood hazard area. And in short, if you live in that area, your mortgage lender is going to require you to get flood insurance, and it will be much more expensive than if you live outside of it. So what this blue area means, essentially, FEMA has done flood insurance studies, and they have determined that this area is within what they call the 1% flood hazard area. So what that means is you have a 1% chance of being flooded any given year. And that's important to note because that's just almost an arbitrary line drawn by bureaucrats or Congress sometime decades ago, right? There isn't a lot of scientific rigor that went behind this. So now we live with that decision. And what that means is you have a 1% chance of being flooded according to FEMA if you live in this blue area. So if you have a 0.99% chance of being flooded, you're not in the blue area. So you can see where I'm going with this. The demarcation line for a FEMA floodplain is just really hard and may not really be the best way to assess your true risk. So I'm going to go through this map. I'm just going to pan a little bit to the north, and this is a good example here. Here we see Ross Creek, which is a tributary to Guadalupe River in San Jose. And you can see the river obviously is a flood area because water travels on rivers, but you have this blue area that's shaded over a neighborhood in San Jose. So what that means for the residents here is if they have a mortgage, they probably have to pay flood insurance, and it's probably getting more expensive every year. But let's say, let's zoom in here and say, okay, I live in a house, that's right next to this blue line. So see if the background loads. Let's say you live in this house right here. You don't have to pay flood insurance, but is it a good idea to get flood insurance? I think our message here is to be aware of your risks. And if you live by a creek, it's probably a good idea to get flood insurance. And the reason why is you never know what's going to happen. You could have a bank failure due to heavy rainfall, heavy flow in the creek. You could have a tree block, a culvert or a bridge, and then the water backs up and spills onto the road and possibly into your home. In addition, if the storm drain backs up in front of your house because the city didn't unclog a storm sewer, you're kind of out of luck. If that backs up to your driveway into your house, that's also considered flood damage, even though it had nothing to do with a river or a creek overtopping. So those are just kind of some general warnings and just signals that flood insurance is a decently good idea if you're worried about protecting your property. So I think that's a good intro, Paula. I'll be around to answer any more questions, specific questions that people have about FEMA and any flood zones.
Perfect, thank you. And if you are watching us tonight and you have a secondary device, you want to go to valleywater.org flood ready, you can find that map and start playing with it. Maybe put in your address. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at the end of the segment. So Jack, we discussed community flooding spots, hot spots. What does that mean? And I understand you have some examples to share with us.
Sure, yeah. So I wanted to zoom in on kind of specific areas we believe to be at higher risk. And this is from just historically observing what happens as it rains. So the bad part about the FEMA flood map is it just shows you the 1% chance. If you live here, you might have a 1.5% chance of flooding and you're in a blue zone. You also might have a 50% chance of flooding and maybe in a blue zone. So you really don't know how risky your property is actually in relation to the 1% flood. So I'm going to highlight some areas, just a few areas, but there's definitely more. And if you don't see your area listed, I'll be again on this call, so you can just ask me about it, and I'll be happy to talk to you about where you live and your associated flood risks. So this first location is in Morgan Hill. It is West Leagas Creek, kind of when it exits the urbanized area. Downtown Morgan Hill is up here. There's a bunch of new developments. This is Butterfield Road, Watsonville Road, and Monterey Road Highway. So in yellow is the Fema Floodplain. So that's what you would see if you go to the FEMA Map Service Center I showed earlier. But this blue area shows historical flooding that we've recorded over the decades. And you can see these are not overlapping in some areas. What this means is if you lived here and whenever this flood happened, oops, I didn't get flood insurance, but I ended up being flooded. That's just another kind of warning that floods do not always behave how we think they will behave. Yes, water flows downhill, but water can be blocked by things that are outside of our control. So kind of the moral of the story is there are areas in yellow that historically we have not recorded any flooding, but there are areas that are not in yellow that we have seen flooded. So the FEMA map is not the one-stop done deal for determining your flood risk. The next location we have here is Ross Creek in San Jose. So this is an area that I showed earlier on the FEMA map service. Again, the yellow is the FEMA map, and the blue is where it actually flooded historically. Now you can see this is a clear difference in these two. So the people who lived here may have gotten flooded, but we're not required to purchase flood insurance. While people here were required to purchase flood insurance, but weren't flooded. And the lastly location I want to talk about is San Francisco. This is a well-known spot. They experienced significant flooding in 1998 and even in 2012 in East Palo Alto down here. The reason I didn't show the East Palo Alto section is since I think just last year, a couple of years ago, we finished a flood control project down here. So these guys are all safe now, and remaining is the creek overbanking this area. I also want to highlight this area right here, upstream of University Avenue and 101. It's both the Four Seasons Hotel, if you guys are familiar with the area. in 2012, a tree fell and blocked University Avenue. So what ended up happening is the river backed up and it flooded out these homes right here. These areas were not shown in the Fema floodplain, but unfortunately they were flooded. So just another cautionary tale that you are not always safe if you're outside of the Fema floodplain.
Very well said. Thank you, Jack. And if we live near a creek, is there any way we can find out what the level of the water is before we receive an emergency alert?
Sure. So if people don't know, we operate a slew of sensors around the county measuring stream flow, rainfall, and our reservoir levels. These can be also accessed in our Flood Ready webpage. There are two links here. There is a map-based flood watch tool, which we put together after 2017 flood events. But there's also the alert system, alert gauge system, some of you are familiar with. We're actually working to combine these pages, and the beta site is live, so you can go around and play with it. It is this first link here. And it will bring you essentially to a map-based portal. So if you're interested in creek levels, you would select a stream layer, and you would pick a creek that you'd be interested in. So with our previous example with Paul with San Francisco Creek, I can zoom in here and you can see it pops up with the current reading. And you can click on it and it'll retrieve the data of what's currently occurring. So it's currently, really low, 1/4 of a foot stage. But, at what point do you have to worry? So there's information down here if you scroll down, color coded, yellow, orange, red, kind of like your TSA warnings. And obviously the higher you go, the worse it is. And this is the threshold, approximate threshold that we have determined to be a time when you would be worried. So how you would unlock this feature is there's a flood watch toggle right here. It's off right now because maybe you're just worried about the last few days. But if you turn it on, it'll scale the graph to show you where purple, red, orange, and the yellow bands are. So right now you can see the blue line is pretty much at the very bottom. But say it rains and you see it go up. It goes up to yellow or it goes up to orange and it hasn't peaked yet. You can quickly cross-reference with this table right here and figure out if there is a risk in your creek to potential flooding. And this is available for many other sensors as well. So all these sensors here have these thresholds available, and not just Palo.
Wonderful. And we invite residents to really go into our page and play with this a little bit beforehand, maybe become familiar with the sensor that is near your home. So let's say there is unfortunately a storm coming, the creek levels are high, and we are worried about our property. Where can we find sandbags to protect our home or our business?
Sure, that's a good question. I think you mentioned a storm. Next week, we have quite a good possibility of having a big rain event. So it's a good time to get ready. So in our Flood Ready page, there is a sandbag distribution site link right here. So if you click on it, you can download a PDF map. So essentially these are locations usually located at a city corporation yard where they have their maintenance vehicles, or at a district site where it's just kind of empty land. What we do is we dump a big pile of sand. You come with your shovel and your truck or your car, whatever you want. And we have bags available, and you kind of self-serve. You fill up as many bags you need, and you can take them home and protect your house.
So bring the teenagers.
Yeah, bring labor.
Perfect. All right. And also you discussed earlier how a tree that fell into a creek caused flooding where it was not expected. And we really are very grateful when the community alerts us of blockages in creeks. Where can they report something if they see that the creek is just not flowing because something has blocked it?
Mm-hmm. So in the same site, if you can find it, it's let's see, right here. Report creek blockages and local street flooding. So if you click on this, there'll be a link there's a hotline, and there is an online portal that you can use to report any issues you see. It could be debris, it could be a failure of, say a concrete wall fell in the creek. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And anything that related to our facilities, give us a ping and we'll try to take care of it.
Wonderful. We certainly will. Thank you so much, Jack. That was very interesting. And I am grateful that you're staying till the end so you can answer some questions from the audience. And in the meantime, I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll move on to our next presentation. And also wanted to remind everybody that we will make all the resources available to you at the end. But again, that webpage that you want to remember is valleywater.org/flood-ready. That's where you can access all of these neat tools to be ready in case of a flood. So now I wanted to share a video. We are going to be discussing flood insurance. And if you're not required by your mortgage to have it and you don't have it, but you're a renter or a homeowner, we really want you to consider getting it. And maybe by watching the story of this lady, you will be inspired. She's a homeowner and she was hit by not one, but 2 floods shortly after buying her home. But thankfully she had the right coverage. So let's watch her story.
My name is Danielle Reese. I live in Washington, North Carolina. A lot of locals, we call it Little Washington. This location is great. I love being able to walk.
Paula, your sound went out for the video.
Through 2 hurricanes since I purchased this home, Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Florence. Hurricane Florence, I got about 1.5 feet of water downstairs. I had 3 bedrooms and a laundry room, and everything had to go. My bed is currently in my living room until construction is completed. My insurance agent was great. He called to check on me, confirmed I did have water in my house, and he immediately put in my claim into the system, which I was very thankful that he was working during the storm. I think that helped with getting my adjuster out sooner, getting my funds sooner, so I could go ahead and start this process of rebuilding. I initially got from my flood adjuster about $26,000. And I'm grateful for every penny of that because I will use that along with my ICC grant funding to help elevate my home so I don't have to go through this again. Flood insurance is a good value. I wouldn't be where I am today. I'm grateful for that program. I don't know what I would do without it.
That is very true. And I have to say that I've been to quite too many disasters, and I always see 2 groups of people after a disaster. And one group, is okay. They're going to a hotel and they know that their belongings will be replaced because they were insured. And then there's the other group that unfortunately is being hit with something that will have a generational impact. So flood insurance really makes a difference in being able to bounce back from a disaster. So this is why I'm very excited that a very experienced insurance broker in our area, Warren Wettenstein, has agreed to join us tonight to talk about flood insurance and the different options, coverages that you might want to consider. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and allow Warren to take over so that we can listen to his presentation. Welcome, Warren. You're on mute. I think you're still muted, so yeah, thank you.
Unmuted. Okay, unmuted. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Let's get flood ready. Flood insurance coverage, what you need to know to help protect you, your family, and your business. Hang on. Need to start the slideshow. Okay. Lenders can require you to have flood insurance. And this is just another view of what he was talking about earlier. If you're in any kind of an A or a V zone, any of the red zones, you have a higher risk of flood risk. and lenders can require you to have flood insurance. And even if you're not required to have flood insurance, my mantra is, if you know, it's worth having, even if you paid off your home, because you can still have a lot of risk. NFIP is with FEMA. It's a national flood insurance program. It has been around for 50 years. That's the logo. And as far as FEMA is concerned, the entire world is considered a flood risk. Lenders can require the properties in high-risk zones to have flood insurance per the guidelines, and it is available for renters, homeowners, manufactured homes, landlords, and commercial property. There are 60 participating carriers that all use the same NFIP standard rate tables. And you can look it up as was discussed earlier in this presentation. FEMA.gov is a good place, and there are other links to that, which I believe they're going to have at the end of this presentation. NFIP premiums can be lower than private flood insurance. There is a 30-day waiting period unless you're closing on a house. Title is closing sooner, i.e. if you, this is Thursday, if you're closing on the home on Tuesday, you can get NFIP insurance to go into effect Tuesday. But there is a 30-day waiting period. It is a 1-year policy. You cannot buy it just before flood season and cancel after the rainy season. It is a 1-year non-cancelable policy. Residential coverage limit is $250,000 for structure and $100,000 for contents. Commercial coverage is $500,000 and $500,000. NFIP does not cover loss of use or loss of rents. Coverage limits may not replace most Silicon Valley homes and buildings. As you're aware, market price on a home could be over $1 million, but the replacement value might be $250,000, $500,000. It could be substantially less because the land is valuable. Supplemental insurance is available to layer on top of the NFIP limits. NFIP writes 84% of the flood premiums in the US, and the average claim is $43,000. In the video, you saw the lady, she had damage. If you saw that they had to take away everything that was below 3 feet, all the walls, all that, the flooring, all the contents, that was all gone. She was able to move upstairs to her second level, but if she didn't, she'd have to find a hotel or someplace to stay at. And those rates are going to go up if there's surge pricing. Private flood insurance is an alternative that's come about recently in the past few years. There are many providers, and there is a broad range of coverages, premiums, and deductibles. Lien holders must accept equivalent or compliant private flood insurance. All flood insurance is not the same. They may use different maps and criteria. Some of the private flood insurance can get it down to 10 by 10 foot squares. So you may be priced at one price. You may be cheaper than your neighbor across the street, even though as far as FEMA is concerned, it's all the same broad area. So the suggestion is, do some research, have someone good. Excess and surplus carriers include carriers that like Lloyd's of London. There are more choices than the $250,000, $100,000 coverage that FEMA covers. Contents is not a required coverage. So many times people get higher than $250,000 on the property, and they might get $20,000 on contents because the replacement value on their contents may not be worth $100,000. There's no reason to pay extra. Higher limits preclude the need for a supplemental layer policy. There is a wide range of premiums, options, and payment. Payment can be through escrow, e-check, credit card. Usually no elevation certificate is required. Elevation certificates, by the way, can run $850 on up. And the main purpose of an elevation certificate is to have a certified land surveyor see how your land is relative to sea level and the flood risk. Private flood insurance can offer loss of use, loss of rents. It can pay, the loss of use and loss of rents can pay for mortgage or temporary housing costs. There is no 30-day waiting period unless there is a moratorium. If it's about to rain badly, then there may be a moratorium on you getting flood insurance. FHA, as of November of 2020, is now accepting, the FHA-backed mortgages are now accepting private flood insurance. And so this, to simplify and distill this, I created a chart. Elevation certificate may be, let me move. It may be suggested with NFIP. Private insurance generally does not require it. Coverage, again, $250,000 for the dwelling, up to $5 million for private. Coverage contents, $100,000 max on NFIP, up to $1 million on private flood. Loss of use is not available on NFIP. It is available up to $50,000 on private. That means loss of use means you still pay your mortgage, but you can take the family and go to a hotel or move to an apartment or whatever while your facility is being rebuilt. Debris removal is not available with NFIP. It is up to $500,000 or coverage A on your homeowners or renters policy. Replacement cost value is not available on NFIP. It is an optional endorsement on private. There's ACV, which is depreciated value or replacement value. My strong suggestion is replacement value because that's what it's going to cost you to replace your property. Deductibles, NFIP is $1,000 deductible. Private flood can go down to a $500 deductible on the minimums. A waiting period, as I just said, 30 days or sooner if closing, and there's no waiting period on private. Renter, landlord, owner, manufactured home is available on NFIP and private. Flood rating system, NFIP has their flood rate zones, and in private, they use proprietary. They're actually using geographic, a lot of times the actuaries are using more specialized, more specific criteria. And that's why depending on the flood insurance carrier, the premium can be different. It is accepted by lien holders and can be paid out of escrow for both of them. Lower cost, higher flexible limits, sometimes on NFIP, usually on private. NFIP is most property casualty insurance agents can sell NFIP policies. Private flood insurance, they have to be appointed by the carriers, and every carrier is not the same, and every agent or broker does not have more than one. Policy period is 1 year in both cases. And here's a summary. It is a 1-year policy unless you sell. If you sell your home during the 1 year, then you get a refund on the unused premium. You can't, and as I said, you cannot buy just before the rainy season and cancel after. They've learned not to do that. Elevation certificates are appropriate and can be cost effective. As an example, I had a client who got declined on private flood insurance because he had a stream running through his property. However, he was able to get an elevation certificate and then got a very good rate with NFIP. I was very proud of that. Arrange to have flood insurance premiums paid through escrow to preclude lapses. It is a lot easier to have the escrow company pay flood insurance automatically as opposed to getting a cancellation notice. Elevation certificates, as I said, 850 or above, generally. Again, I've placed the insurance with an elevation certificate where it was worthwhile getting it. And I have replaced $4,000 NFIP policies with $950 private flood insurance policies. So my suggestion on this is do not be scared away by premiums. You know, there is some flexibility. 90% of the homes at risk have no flood coverage at all. And homeowners insurance excludes flood coverage. A 2,500 square foot house, 1 inch of water, the general damage can be at $24,000 to the structure and $3,000 to the contents. So if you're going to be paying a few $100s for flood insurance, you come out ahead. Precautions to take. You in this presentation, some of these have been covered. The idea is carry flood insurance even if you're not required, because you can sustain a loss. Recognize if you're in the 1%, the 100-year flood zone, it's not a contract. It doesn't mean if it flooded in 2018, you have 100 years. You could have 2 100-year floods back to back, and then you'd really be literally wiped out. Elevate valuable items to upper floors, attic, or off-site. Get the stereo, the TVs, whatever, you know, put them away, computers and things. Have the sandbags, plastic sheeting, plywood, screws, nails on hand before everybody's running to Home Depot and they run out. Keep a current inventory by room, and with for your expensive items, also take a picture of the serial number. Keep it on your smartphone, put it in the cloud, because it's going to be a lot easier to get an insurance claim paid if you have good inventory, photo inventory and documentation. Move vehicles to a higher elevation. If you're in a flood zone, find some area and park it where it's up a hill or away from the flood zone. It's real easy to do. Verify that your insurance policies are in effect and they're paid up. Consider earthquake insurance with loss of use or loss of rental income. I know everybody says earthquake insurance is expensive, but not having it is even more expensive. Thank you. I'm going to give back the screen share. If I can.
All right, that was very interesting. Thank you so much. And I really think that that point that you made about the cost of flood insurance versus whether we can pay for the cost of a disaster really brings the point home about investing in this coverage. So I'm going to now introduce our next guest, Alexander Gordon. He is our emergency safety and security expert on staff. And I'm thrilled that you're with us, Alex, tonight, so we can discuss how we can get ready for a disaster. And I'm going to try to share my screen properly here. But what is the first step in terms of preparing a family communications plan?
Right. So if we're looking at building an emergency plan for floods, there's some specific things you want to look for. First off, start with communications. Now, the different members of your family or the people outside of your family, who would you need to communicate with in case there was a flooding event? A real flooding event, you're actually looking at probably leaving your home. So, make sure that everyone has each other's information. Also, you need to know where to go. Ideally, everyone would be together in one place, if they had to evacuate the home during the flood, but that's actually not the case all the time. You never know. I mean, these things don't happen overnight, but you can't guarantee you're going to be together all the time. So you need to find a place to actually go when you are asked to evacuate, meaning if you get certain alerts, or if law enforcement or the fire department come knocking at your door, you really got to take that seriously and have plans ready to go. And where you go, whether it's a family member's house, somewhere else, you got to predetermine that so that there's no confusion on where you're going to go. And when it comes to all the different contact information and who you're going to notify that you've had to evacuate due to the potential flood, it's really important that you have hard copies, or sometimes you don't have your phone all the time. Sometimes things go bad with cellular reception or whatnot, but it's always good to have, even on a little card, kept it with you, hard numbers on, phone numbers to call and communicate with those that are important. So those are the first steps to building an emergency plan for flood related emergencies. And as you can see, there's a good link there for more resources.
Great, thank you, Alex. And if there's a disaster, we probably want to have a bag ready. We don't want to be going around gathering things when we're under pressure. I know you have an example to show us, but what are some of the things that should go into this important go bag?
Sure. So you might have seen this from the video earlier, but it's good to have a bag here, but this is just an example. It's just a starting point for the things you may have to take with you. So let's start with the basics. You need food and you need water. So how much food, how much water? Now, when it comes to creating a go bag or an emergency kit, you're looking at a minimum of 3 days worth of stuff. And when we look at food, you're looking for non-perishables. I always recommend, tuna and peanut butter, not that you combine them together, but they're very portable and they're protein, so they'll keep you going. For water, you actually need 1 gallon of water per person per day. Now, this might seem like a lot, but you're actually not consuming all of the water. There may be a point where you have to use this water actually for hygiene and cleaning. So those are the standards. You may also need radios. Now, if you're going to be evacuating, again, this is like a handheld radio, and very important whether it's a hand crank or batteries, to have batteries as well. But you got to have your radio, but you also have to know where to listen to get information. So I'll probably mention this again, but KCBS radio here in the Bay Area, they have 2 stations, 2 dials. So 106.9 FM and also 740 AM is the place where you want to get important information during an emergency. Clothes. So clothes, you're not going to bring your whole wardrobe, but you got to have some stuff to change clothes because you may be gone for a couple of days, especially if you're going to a shelter. If you don't have anywhere else to go, you got to be able to make it through a few days. Books, toys, and activities. If you have young kids, it's hard enough to keep them occupied during normal day-to-day activities, but during an emergency, especially if you have to go to a shelter, you got to do whatever you can to keep them occupied, because then if they're not, it becomes much more challenging to deal with the situation. If you have different medical needs, make sure you have some extra stuff in your emergency kit. Or if you have pets, how are you going to take that pet with you? Do you have one of those carriers, food for them? Keep that stuff in mind. When it comes to vital records, I don't think everyone wants to like bag up all of their stuff in one place and run away with it, but it's really important to have copies of that stuff. And the best way to do it is to scan the information, keep it on a USB drive, because whenever you need that, there will be a computer somewhere that you can pull that information and figure out whether it's a medical information, your birth certificates, whether it's driver's license, whatever it might be. It's always good to have copies because you can always get originals later. And the last thing here is if you do have to actually evacuate, now this doesn't go into your kit, but think about your vehicle. And ideally, yes, we want to have our gas tank full all the time, although that might be challenging. So what I would say is once you get to around half, make sure you have at least half of a tank, if not more, because you may need to evacuate at 1 o'clock in the morning and it may be very hard to find a place to get gas. So again, starting point for an emergency kit, but those are the basics there.
Excellent advice. Thank you, Alex. And both of us have been to disaster zones, and really everything you mentioned is important, but those vital records, having copies, at least in an electronic form, really can get you started in getting back to normal and getting all those documents. So let's talk about emergency apps. We don't have landlines anymore. Why are these apps so important? How do they work and how do we register?
Sure. So we have 3 of these highlighted here. So I want to explain briefly the importance of each one. So Alert SCC, that's actually more of a system. It's not an application, but it's a very important alerting system that you sign up for. You go to Alert SCC, you do a search, you can go on. This is a countywide alerting system. And basically you go in there and you put in your contact information and where you live. Now, I would suggest putting information not only where you live, but also where you work. You could live in San Jose, but maybe you work in Sunnyvale, and there might be flood concerns in both places. When you put that information in, you get alerts when there are emergency concerns, whether it's flooding, whether it's earthquake, other things. You will get an alert from either the city or the county, because all the cities and the county of Santa Clara utilize this system as their mass notification system for warning. Now, Ready SCC is an application and is very handy. That's more of a preparedness application. A lot of good resources there on how to build your plan, more details in there. Also, you can report your status in there. So take a look for that, Ready SCC. It is an application. You can put it on your phone. And then the Red Cross Flood app also allows for monitoring of different types of alerts in your areas. Red Cross will send you information as well. A lot of good resources there. But again, these are all different tools that we use, because like Paula said, we don't have landlines anymore. In the past, landlines were in an emergency database that first responders could use to blast out information to. And since we've kind of shifted away from that, you know, there are very good tools out there, but you got to opt in. You got to get in there, you got to register, put in your information. And it's really important, not only for you as a parent or whomever, but get that app put on every single cell phone and register for all the members of your family, because you never know where folks are going to be when the time comes, whether they're at school, whether you're at work, or whether you're at home or a friend's house. So really important tools there.
Very important tools. And we've had wildfires recently, and I was registered for these alerts, and it was really reassuring to be notified on a constant basis of not only a flood, but just any disaster. So let's say the waters are rising. What is a way in which we can evacuate safely if that is what we need to do?
Right. So this does, you know, go back to a little bit of planning. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit to what Jack talked about as far as a tool. So the flood map tool that you can get to, and then you can put in your address and figure out if you're in a floodplain. What I recommend doing is doing that, but then expanding the map out, because as you try to figure out how to get your evacuation point, whether it's a, you know, a friend's house or a family's house, you got to make sure you don't go through the flood areas. And that's really, really important, because, you know, you might think that that water is not that deep and it's just flowing around, but 1 foot of water that's rolling can really push a vehicle. So it's very, very dangerous. You got to stay out of those waters and not just force your way through. So it's, again, really important to plan ahead of time, not only where you're going to go, but how to get there. And using that FEMA tool will help you pick different routes to get to your final destination. So while you're, you know, evacuating from one area that's flooding, you don't force yourself into a different area that's flooding as well, because you didn't plan ahead of time. And you really got to think about this stuff, especially if you're near one of these flood prone areas. And again, if you are evacuating, listen to KCBS radio, 106.9 FM or 740 AM. You will get emergency information from where you live based on what's happening. And that's where you get that shelter information. That's one of the easiest ways you can figure out if there are shelters being brought up in your area if you have to evacuate.
Perfect, great advice. And yes, it's good to think about this beforehand, not when we're worried and maybe it's dark outside and we're confused. So thank you so much, Alex, for all this great information. I appreciate it so much. And I want to remind everybody that Valley Water every year sends this multilingual flood mailer to 52,000 homes in our area. So you should have received yours in early December. And basically this mailer has all the tips that we have discussed here tonight, along with the websites and the numbers. And the neat thing is, if you got yours, I hope you didn't miss this, but at the back, there's a magnet. It's a little giveaway that we have for 2 years now. And it has the most important sites that we have discussed, such as the Sandbag site and our Flood Ready resource page, the floodsmart.gov for flood insurance information site, and the FEMA flood map. So if you did receive your mailer and you didn't look at it yet, just look at the back and maybe take this magnet and put it on your fridge. And every time you open it to have a snack or a breakfast or lunch or dinner, just maybe it will be a reminder to get flood ready. So we also have a handout. We're in a virtual setting, hopefully not for very much longer, but if we were in person meeting you, we would be giving you this handout at this time. But you can download it from that same page at the bottom of the valleywater.org flood ready page. Is a link to this handout, and it has really good information about what to do before, during, and after a flood. And I did put that page in the chat box along with my email address. So if you do live in a flood zone and for some reason you did not receive our flood mailer, please send me your address and I will mail you one right away so that you have it. So I really want to thank all of our presenters. This is the end of the formal presentation. We're open for questions and all of our experts are here to answer any questions you might have. So I'm gonna send it back to Albert to handle the Q&A section. Back to you, Albert.
All right, thank you, Paula. Before we begin our Q&A session, I would like to remind folks how to use our Q&A portal. Please enter your questions through there. It's at the bottom of your toolbar if you're using desktop. And then also, if you want to raise your hand, ask a verbal question, feel free to. And for those joining us on Facebook Live, you can also make a comment and I'll try my best to relay that in And also just wanted to recognize that we do have some other board directors in our attendance today. We do have Director Richard Santos. And earlier, we also had Director Linda Lazat joining us for today's meeting. All right, we do have a question in the Q&A portal from Roxanne. It looks like we have a question related to historical flooding. Before I do that, I'm just going to turn off the screen share here real quickly so we have more of a screen space to work with. All right, so Roxanne, she asked, is there a way to see the extent of historical flooding on the Valley Water website? Jack, would you happen to know that?
I don't believe so, but it could be something requested through public records. We don't have it serviceable directly by the public.
So great, thank you, Jack. So there is a way to do it, but we may have to submit a request to our records department. Thank you, Jack, for that. All right, and we do have some chat questions here. Again, please, it's hard for us to keep track of those chat questions. Please enter them through the Q&A portal. Scrolling through here, there's a lot of messages on my hand. Looks like I have one from Cole Cameron. This question is related to Lexington Reservoir. If Lexington Reservoir would broke, would it go down on the Los Gatos downtown side of Highway 17 or on the other side or both? Thanks for a more specific answer. So again, the question is whether if Lexington broke, where would the floodwaters go, on downtown Los Gatos or on the other side of Highway 17? Jack, I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, or Alex.
Yeah, I think that's a question for me. So, I mean, dam failures, you're talking like really widespread flooding. It'd be hard for me to talk about it. What you could do, I could give you a link, Cole, in the chat. It sends you to the Division of Safety of Dams, the state DSOD site, and we have submitted many inundation maps to them, and they have an interactive system. So I'll link you to that, and then you can see the projected failures and their respective inundations. So I'll just do that in the chat.
All right, thank you. And then Cole just also had a just general comment saying just great job to the team. He is CERT, Community Emergency Response Team certified, or part of the team. He appreciates the contribution our organization is making to the community, making it safe. All right, let's see here. But again, please, I'm going to, that link that Jack just sent was directly to, oh, there he goes. Jack just sent that to the chat box. Again, feel free to enter your questions to the Q&A box or also raise your hand. We do have a question on Facebook Live. This may not be as related to emergency preparedness. It is related to homelessness. I don't know if we have the right staff on hand here, but I'll ask it. And if anyone wants to take that question, we'll see if we can answer it. So from Greg on Facebook Live, he asked, why are homeless people being allowed to live right next to our water supply? I'm assuming creeks he's asking about, right next to our ponds and lakes. Shouldn't, for everyone's sake, people be kept at a distance so human waste isn't being dumped directly into our water? I'm not sure if we have the staff or maybe one of our directors or someone want to take that. If not, we can direct Greg to submit his question in writing to our other staff for response.
Well, I can answer that very quickly.
Sure.
First of all, we are not a land use agency. So we, at the Water District, do not have power to restrict any kind of building. Those that have the power are municipalities and the county, and they provide for permitting for any development. And that is whether it's housing or industrial buildings or office buildings. So we don't have the governmental power to prevent folks from building in certain areas. That has been a problem for a long time. The best that we can do is, as we do here, is to provide folks with information about safety and how to prevent being in a flood, getting in a flood, or building near a flood area. That's the best that we can do, is to provide information. but we don't have the power to restrict folks from building in any specific areas.
All right, thank you, Chair. And also, I do recall now during some of our CO series that because of the pandemic, we're also limited to how much we can access these sites as well. All right, we do have a question in our Q&A portal here. This is from David J. Hi, with the extended closure of Anderson Reservoir, how might that impact the traditional floodplain feeding into South San Jose? I think, Jack, this is for you.
Sure, yeah, I can give a generic answer. So obviously with Anderson Reservoir really low and essentially a dead pool for most of the year, it's very, very unlikely to see any spillway activation for Anderson. I don't think if we historically use meteorology for the past whatever since we've been recording, I don't think the reservoir would spill if we operated the current way. So yeah, nothing to worry about.
All right, thank you so much. And we have the sounds of the pandemic and working from home behind everyone here. And Dave just wanted to also just thank us for holding this informative virtual event. All right, looking at time check here, we're running on the hour here. It's almost about 6 o'clock. One final chance to submit your questions before we wrap things up. All right, seeing none. Paula, I'm going to hand things back to you.
Thank you, Albert.
The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Great questions. And thank you to our experts for taking those on. I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And I want to send it back to our chair, Tony Estremera, for some closing remarks. And again, all those resources are on the page floodready.org. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Paula. As we conclude this meeting, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight, and also want to underscore the importance of being insured in case of a flood. Remember that this type of insurance is different from your regular homeowners or renters insurance, and it needs 30 days to go into effect. If you're not insured, I encourage you to visit www.floodsmart.gov and inquire about your options. Please also use our webpage, www.valleywater.org/floodready, as a resource for the emergency preparedness steps that we've discussed here tonight. Let's stay connected, and please follow us on social media and sign up for our email newsletter. Thank you again, stay safe, and see you next time.